The envelope was cream-colored, thick stock, the kind you'd use for a wedding invitation. My mother slid it across the tablecloth between the cranberry sauce and the gravy boat, and she did it without looking at me, the way you'd pass someone the salt. "Open it," she said. "I want you to understand the temperature of that room. 68 degrees. My father always kept it too warm, and the candles on the table were the cinnamon ones from the dollar store, and Colton was laughing at something on his phone, and nobody had stopped eating." I opened the envelope with a butter knife because it was closer than my hand. Inside was an invoice, typed, itemized, $40,000, made out to me, for something called Colton's Business Launch, Family Contribution. My mother finally looked at me. "We gave up something to get him," she said, calm as a weather report. "The least you can do is finish the job." Nobody at that table asked what she meant by gave up. I did. I'd find out in 11 days, in a shoebox in my grandmother's attic. And by the time I did, I'd already stopped being angry and started being exact. But here's what none of them knew sitting at that table, chewing on my father's dry turkey. I count things for a living, and I was about to start counting them. Welcome back to Home of Secrets. I'm Sabrina Okoye. I'm 34. I'm a forensic accountant based in Cleveland, and this is the story of how my parents spent 22 years telling me I was the placeholder child, right up until the day I found the paperwork that proved it. Drop a comment if you've ever been the responsible one. And subscribe, because it gets worse before it gets better. I was born to Denise and Frank Vasile in a small house in Parma, Ohio. The kind of house where the furnace groaned all winter, and everyone pretended not to hear it. For the first 8 years of my life, I was an only child, and for the first 8 years of my life, that was apparently a problem that needed solving. My grandmother, my mother's mother, a widow named Agnes who smelled like Estée Lauder and stored her cash in a coffee tin, used to tell me I was enough. She said it so often it became a kind of joke between us. "You're enough, Sabrina Bean." She left me a trust when I was born. Not a fortune. $61,000, invested conservatively, meant to mature when I turned 18 and pay for college. It had my name on the paperwork, and hers on the original signature card. I didn't know the exact number until I was 34. I knew the number existed, though, because my grandmother told me about it every single year on my birthday, like a bedtime story. That's your safety net, Sabrina Bean. Nobody can touch that but you. When I was 8, my parents started fertility treatments. I remember this only in fragments. My mother crying in the bathroom with the fan on. My father's face when the phone would ring during dinner. A manila folder on the kitchen counter that said, Women's Health Associates, that I wasn't supposed to look at, and looked at anyway. I didn't understand what any of it meant. I understood that something in the house had shifted, that I had become slightly less visible, like a lamp that had been dimmed one notch. I have one object from that year, a certificate, a spelling bee, 3rd grade, county level, 2nd place. I brought it home, glowing. My mother put it on the refrigerator for exactly 4 days. On the 5th day, it was gone, and in its place was an ultrasound photo, black and gray and shaped like a comma, with a sticky note that said Baby Vasel Due March. I asked where my certificate went. My mother said, I'm sure it's around somewhere, sweetheart, in the voice adults use when they've already stopped listening. Colton was born the following March. I was 9. I remember being handed him in the hospital and being told, "This is your brother. This is who we've been waiting for. Not this is your brother. Welcome to the family. This is who we've been waiting for." 9-year-olds notice prepositions like that. I noticed it and filed it away in the part of my brain that files things without telling the rest of me why. If you've ever been the kid who understood the family's real hierarchy before anyone said it out loud, stay with me. It gets clearer. The next 12 years ran on a simple economy. Colton's school photos went in frames. Mine went in a drawer. Colton's report cards got taped to the fridge, even when they were bad, because he's trying so hard. Mine got a nod and a good job, even when I had a 4.0, because apparently that was just what I did, like breathing. At 16, I got a part-time job at a tax prep office after school. Not because we needed the money, my father would say, but because it's good for you to learn responsibility. Colton, at 16, got a car. Used. A little beat up, but a car. I took the bus. I want to be clear that I didn't hate my brother. Colton didn't do any of this. Colton was a baby, and then he was a kid who got handed things, and then he was a young man who never learned he was being handed things, which is its own kind of damage, though it took me years to feel any sympathy about that. At 16, something else happened. Something I didn't understand until I was 34, and holding paperwork with a magnifying glass. My father asked me to sign some documents for my trust. So it's ready for you at 18, yeah. Banks need updated signatures. I signed where he told me to sign, at the kitchen table, using his pen, while he stood over my shoulder, telling me where the X was. I was 16. I trusted him the way you trust gravity. I went to Kent State on loans. Not the trust. The trust, my mother told me when I asked, had some fees, some penalties. Banks take their cut. You know how it is. I believed her because I had no reason not to. I graduated with $40,000 in debt and a degree in accounting, and I have never once, not one single time in 18 years, stopped paying that debt back on the exact same day of the month. But that came later. First, there were the quiet years, and the quiet years are where this story actually lives. I got my first job at 22, a junior auditor position at a regional firm, $38,000 a year. And within 4 months, my mother called me crying because the furnace had died. The same furnace that had groaned all through my childhood, finally giving out, and they were short $1,100 for the repair. I sent it. Of course I sent it. What kind of daughter wouldn't send it? That was the first of what I now know, because I built a spreadsheet, because building spreadsheets is the only way I know how to grieve. Totals $86,412 over 12 years. The mortgage shortfall in 2015, when my father's hours got cut. The root canal my mother needed and didn't have insurance for. The property taxes, twice. The roof, once. $9,000. Quietly wired. No thank you card. No acknowledgement at Christmas. Nothing. Colton's car insurance for 2 years after he got his second speeding ticket, and my parents said they couldn't in good conscience keep bailing him out, and then called me instead, because apparently my conscience had different terms and conditions. I paid these things not because anyone forced me to, but because I had absorbed a lesson so early I couldn't feel its edges anymore. That love, in my family, was a service you performed. not a thing you were owed. I paid because I thought if I was useful enough, eventually someone would say the sentence I'd been waiting my whole life to hear, which was some version of, "We see you." Interleaved with all of this, the wiring, the spreadsheets, the automatic payments I'd set up so nobody even had to ask twice, were the small cuts. At my cousin's wedding, my aunt introduced me to a table of strangers as, "And this is Denise's daughter. She does something with numbers," while Colton got introduced as, "Our future business owner. Big things coming." At my parents' anniversary party, my mother thanked everyone who supported this family, and thanked 3 neighbors by name, and did not thank me, standing 4 feet away, holding a card with a check inside it for $2,000, folded into thirds. If you've ever quietly funded a family that couldn't be bothered to spell your name right in a toast, I want you to know I see you. And this next part is for you too. By the time I turned 34, I had a title, Senior Forensic Accountant, a firm that trusted me with fraud investigations worth 8 figures, and a life that looked, from the outside, entirely put together. I had a condo. I had a savings account that wasn't just theater. I had, for the first time, started to believe that maybe I'd built something of my own that nobody could touch. Then came Thanksgiving, and the envelope, and the $40,000 invoice for my brother's business launch, which, I later learned, was a food truck he wanted to buy with a business plan that consisted of the word tacos written on a napkin. I sat with that envelope in my lap for the rest of the meal. Nobody asked if I was okay. Nobody asked what I thought. My father passed the rolls. Colton showed my mother a video on his phone of the truck he wanted, red and chrome, 42,000 miles on it. Practically new. And my mother made a sound of delight I hadn't heard directed at anything I'd ever done in my entire life. I set my fork down. I didn't slam anything. I didn't raise my voice. I said, "I need to think about it," folded the invoice back into its envelope, put my coat on, and left before dessert. Nobody followed me to the car. I sat in the driveway for 6 minutes before I could make my hands work the ignition. And in those 6 minutes, for the first time in 12 years, I did not cry. I calculated. The following Monday, I did what I do best. I opened a spreadsheet. I canceled the automatic transfer that had been quietly draining $200 from my checking account into my parents' account every month for just in case. A standing order I'd set up at 26 and never revisited. I called the insurance company and removed myself as the secondary contact on Colton's auto policy, the one I'd been quietly paying premiums into. I contacted my bank and removed my parents' names from the emergency contact list on my accounts. A small administrative thing that felt, in that moment, larger than anything I'd ever signed. I framed all of this to myself the way I'd frame a client engagement. No rage, no drama, just line items being zeroed out, one at a time, each one a small, precise subtraction. My father would later call this cold. I called it a closing entry. I did not tell my parents what I'd done. I let them find out the way you find out a pipe has burst. Not from an announcement, but from the water reaching your feet. It took 11 days for the calls to start, and when they started, they didn't start with an apology. They started with a story, and the story was about me. My mother told her sister that I'd cut off the family out of spite over a small ask. My father told his brother that I'd always had a chip on my shoulder about Colton. Word moved through Parma the way it always does, through the church prayer chain, through the group chats, through my aunt, who called me not to check on me, but to relay what everyone was saying, as if she were doing me a favor. By the second week, there was a version of this story circulating where I was the villain, the cold, successful daughter who wouldn't help her struggling little brother, who'd never really been warm, who gets that from her father's side. I heard all of it secondhand, in fragments, delivered by relatives who wanted a reaction. I gave them none. Instead, I opened a new folder on my laptop labeled, simply, Record. I started logging everything. Every payment I'd ever made going back 12 years. Every screenshot of every group text where my name came up. Every voicemail my mother left in that particular tone she uses when she wants a paper trail. That sounds like concern. I did not post anything. I did not defend myself to a single person. I have found, in my professional life, that the loudest people in a room are rarely the ones holding the actual evidence, and I intended to be the second kind. If you've ever been the one who got quiet instead of getting even, understand that quiet is not surrender. Quiet is just where the work happens. The discovery came, as these things often do, in a shoebox. My grandmother had passed 6 years earlier, and her house, held in a small family trust, had finally, after years of my mother's procrastination, been slated for sale. I volunteered to help clear the attic, mostly because I wanted an excuse to be somewhere that wasn't my parents' house, and I found, in a shoebox behind a stack of National Geographic magazines, a manila folder with my name on it in my grandmother's handwriting. Sabrina, trust. Do not lose this. Inside were the original account statements from the trust she'd set up for me at birth. The final one, dated the year I turned 16, showed a balance of $61,340. The next document in the folder was a withdrawal authorization, dated 4 months later, showing the full balance liquidated $61,000, minus fees, wired to an account belonging to Women's Health Associates of Northeast Ohio. The signature on the authorization was mine, Sabrina M. Vasile, except I hadn't signed a withdrawal authorization at 16. I'd signed something my father told me was a signature card update. I know my own signature, and I know what my signature looked like at 16. I still had my old school ID, still had a diary with my own handwriting in it from that exact year. And this was close, but not right. The T was crossed differently. The loop on the B leaned the wrong way. It was the signature of someone who had practiced mine. I sat on the dusty attic floor with that folder for a long time. My grandmother's trust, the one she called my safety net, the one she told me every single birthday nobody could touch, had been drained the same year my father asked me to sign updated paperwork, and the money had gone directly to the fertility clinic that, 9 months later, produced Colton. They hadn't just favored him. They had funded him with money that was legally, provably mine, and forged my signature to do it. I called my Aunt Ruth that night, not the aunt who'd been relaying gossip, but my grandmother's sister, 81 years old, sharp as a blade, and the only person in this family who had never once asked me for anything. Ruth had been at odds with my mother for a decade over exactly this kind of thing: money, favoritism, the way Denise had always treated Agnes's generosity like a resource to be managed, rather than a gift to be honored. Ruth listened to the whole story without interrupting, then said, "Bring me the folder, and bring me a lawyer who doesn't like your parents." I found that lawyer within a week, a woman named Priya Chandrasekaran, a former colleague from my first job, who'd since gone into elder and trust litigation, and who looked at the withdrawal authorization for exactly 90 seconds before she said, "This is forgery, and it's also a breach of fiduciary duty, and the statute of limitations on this kind of thing is longer than you'd think when a minor's trust is involved. You have options. I did not want revenge. Not exactly. I want to be honest about that, the way I've tried to be honest about everything in this story. What I wanted was for the arithmetic of my life to finally be correct. 12 years, $86,000, a forged signature, and $61,000 that had bought my brother's entire existence. I wanted the ledger to balance, in public one time, in front of the people who'd spent 34 years telling me I was the placeholder. Priya helped me file a formal claim against the trust, technically against my father, as the fiduciary who'd controlled it, and helped me request a forensic handwriting analysis, which confirmed within 2 weeks what I already knew. Not my signature. Not even close, once you looked properly. I did not confront my parents directly. Instead, I did what I do for a living. I built the file, bank records, statements, the forged authorizations side by side, with 3 verified samples of my actual 16-year-old handwriting, the analyst's report, a timeline, in my own handwriting this time, connecting the trust liquidation to the fertility clinic deposit 4 months later, dollar for dollar. My parents attempted a countermove before I ever made mine. My mother called 11 times in 1 week. My father showed up at my office unannounced. The first time he had ever, in 34 years, come to see me at work, and told the receptionist he needed to speak to his daughter about a family emergency. I met him in the lobby instead of my office, because I did not want him near my files. "You're really doing this," he said. Not a question. An accusation dressed as a fact. "I don't know what you mean by this," I said. "I haven't done anything yet." "Your mother is beside herself. Ruth's been filling your head with things." "Ruth showed me a shoebox," I said. "The rest was already in it." He tried guilt next. Told me Colton's engagement party was in 3 weeks, that this was not the time to be dramatic, that your grandmother would be devastated to see the family torn apart over money. I let that last one sit in the air for a moment before I answered. "She left me $61,000, I said, and told me every year of my life that nobody could touch it. Someone touched it. I'd like to know who Grandma would actually be devastated about." He left without answering. I watched him walk to his car in the parking lot, and I did not feel triumphant. I felt, for the first time in this entire process, calm. The specific calm of someone who finally has all the numbers in front of them, and knows, with total certainty, which column everything belongs in. The engagement party was held at a rented hall off Ridge Road. White tablecloths, a rented arch of fake eucalyptus, a DJ who was clearly a cousin's friend doing a favor. Colton was radiant. His fiancée, a sweet, oblivious young woman named Katie, kept telling everyone how excited she was for the next chapter. My mother had, of course, invited me. I think she assumed my silence over the past 3 weeks meant I'd folded, the way I always had before. I brought the folder in a plain leather portfolio. I did not plan to make a scene. I planned to make a correction, and I have learned that corrections, delivered calmly, land harder than accusations ever could. The moment came when my father stood to give a toast, and mid-speech decided, for reasons I still don't fully understand, except that cruelty often can't resist an audience, to add a line about family stepping up when it matters, and look directly at me while he said it, and the room, sensing tension the way rooms do, went a half-degree quieter. I stood up, not dramatically. I simply stood, the way you'd stand to give a toast of your own, and my mother's face did something complicated and fast. "I'd like to add something," I said, "since we're talking about family stepping up." I did not raise my voice for what came next. I have been told, by people who were there, that this was somehow worse than yelling would have been. 12 years ago, I started helping this family financially. $86,000 total, not counting today. I have the records, if anyone wants to see them. I let that number sit in the room for exactly as long as it took for 3 people to visibly do math in their heads. 3 weeks ago, I was handed an invoice for $40,000 more for a food truck at Thanksgiving over the cranberry sauce. Colton's face went the color of the tablecloth. My mother said my name, once, sharply, the way you'd say it to a child touching a hot stove. "But here's the part that matters," I continued, and I opened the portfolio, and I set 2 documents on the head table where everyone could see them side by side. This is my actual signature at 16, and this is the one on the authorization that liquidated my grandmother's trust. $61,000. 4 months before my brother was conceived through fertility treatment. A forensic handwriting analyst confirmed last month that these are not the same signature. The room did not gasp, the way it does in movies. It did something worse. It went completely, absolutely silent, the kind of silence where you can hear the ice machine in the next room. My father stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. "This is not the time." "You told me it was a signature card update," I said, still not raising my voice. "You stood over my shoulder and told me where the X was. I was 16. I turned to Colton, whose face had gone from confusion to something closer to grief. "This isn't about you. I want to be clear about that. You didn't ask to be funded this way, but I need everyone in this room to understand that I have spent 12 years being told I was cold for not giving enough, by people who had already taken everything I had before I was old enough to know it was gone. My mother, and this is the part I want to be honest with you about, because I promised myself I would tell this story straight. My mother did not apologize. My mother said, in front of 40 guests, in a voice sharpened by panic, "We gave up something to get him. You should be grateful you got to be part of that." That sentence, the same sentence from Thanksgiving, almost word for word, landed differently in a room full of witnesses than it had over cranberry sauce. I watched 3 different relatives physically flinch. I watched Katie, Colton's fiancée, put her hand over her mouth. I watched my father sit back down, slowly, like something in him had stopped holding weight. I didn't say anything else. I closed the portfolio, picked up my coat, and left the same way I'd left Thanksgiving. No slamming door, No raised voice, just quiet, deliberate distance. Except this time, the whole room watched me go. The aftermath moved faster than I expected. Ruth, it turned out, had quietly informed 2 other cousins in advance. Cousins who'd apparently had their own smaller version of this story with my parents over the years, involving smaller amounts and the same particular flavor of guilt. Priya filed the formal breach of fiduciary claim within the week. My father, facing the handwriting analysis and the paper trail, settled rather than let it go further, agreeing to repay the trust's value with interest. $61,000 plus 12 years of statutory interest, a little over $94,000, structured as a lien against the house they'd never quite finished paying off. My parents' mortgage, the one I'd been quietly subsidizing for over a decade, went into arrears within 4 months, once my payments stopped and the lien attached. They sold the Parma house the following spring at a loss. Colton, to his credit, and I want to give him this, because he didn't ask for any of what happened to him either, called me 2 weeks after the party, not to defend our parents, but to apologize, clumsily, for a lifetime of not noticing. He didn't get the food truck. He got a job at a real restaurant, learning the business from the ground up, which I think, in the long run, might actually serve him better than 40,000 borrowed dollars ever would have. My mother's version of the story in Parma collapsed almost overnight, the way smear campaigns tend to when the documentation finally surfaces. The church prayer chain that had once carried whispers about my coldness now carried a very different kind of whisper. My aunt, the gossiping one, not Ruth, stopped calling me altogether, which honestly felt like a small mercy. As for me, I closed the record folder for the last time in February, filed it away the way you file away a completed audit, and opened a new one instead. This one just labeled mine. I used part of the trust settlement, along with savings I'd finally stopped bleeding out to other people's emergencies, to put a down payment on a small brick building near Shaker Square. I'd been quietly dreaming for years of opening my own firm, one that specifically helped people untangle exactly the kind of financial exploitation I'd lived inside, without a name for it. 6 months later, Okoye Forensic and Advisory opened its doors, and Ruth, 81 years old, and delighted to finally be useful to someone who deserved it, cut the ribbon. On my desk, I keep the shoebox. Not the money, not the paperwork anymore. That's all filed properly, professionally, the way everything should have been from the beginning. Just the shoebox, empty now, a little dented at one corner, because my grandmother put my name on it in her own handwriting the year I was born, and because she was right, in the end, even if it took 34 years and a forged signature to prove it. I had been enough the entire time. Nobody had touched what mattered. They'd just tried. If you've ever been the one who paid quietly while someone else got celebrated loudly, you already know the ending to this story. Doesn't need applause. It just needs the numbers to finally be right. Family isn't the people who spend your inheritance without telling you. It's the people who hand you the shoebox and tell you the truth. Share this with someone who's been keeping score alone for too long. Comment below if any part of this sounded like your own family, and subscribe, because next time, it's someone else's turn to open the envelope.